unceremoniously along the driveway, Janine dragged the stole along the ground, snagging it every few yards on the briars protruding from the potted Alberta roses. To keep her balance, she anchored herself on the cedar wood fence running alongside the drive. Behind her, the glaring lights faded into the mist-shrouded darkness arousing from the new lake. It gave an eerie, almost surreal feel to the landscape and distorted the tall conifer trees into bizarre shapes that might have been animal or human. My name's Lucia Carter Keates. I just spend a lot of time writing. I enjoy writing, I like to express myself. I like to read myself. I like to write long stories, novels, so you can get completely involved with them. A short story is very difficult to write. There's not enough space, not enough words. I like to spread things out and carry right on and just get involved with my characters so they actually become a part of me. And they're with me day and night. They're even with me when I sleep. They're with me when I'm out. It's just, that's actually, I suppose, it's really taken over my life. Well, I just enjoy doing it. I've been writing since I was 11 years old. This book, I first begun writing over 30 years ago, just after we came back from Canada. And then it just got put aside and put aside and put aside because children got in the way, husbands got in the way, everything got in the way. But now, I've got plenty of time to do it all, and well, if I didn't have the time, I wouldn't be having it published. I was 11 years old and I had one of these ancient tree-bank keyboard typewriters. It was a teaching model made in Chicago. It was one my dad had, and he made me go and sit in the extension because the noise was too much. It was bang, 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 and I spent a lot of time doing that. So I just liked to write. And then I continued that right through my teens. And then when I emigrated to Canada, I had so much more to write about, but I didn't have the time because I was looking after children, went over the nanny, so I was looking after children, and that took up a lot of my time. I like to read most types of stories. I like all kinds, but myself, I like to write about supernatural horror. This is something I've been interested in since I was about this high, and it's basically the Native Americans, or I should say Native Canadians, the First Nations Cree, I write about, because I've always been interested in their culture. And while I was living over there, I made a lot of friends among them. I learned their language, I learned some of their powwow dances, I learned to do some of the beadwork. I went onto the reservations, or they actually call them reserves in Canada. I worked with them in the hospital. They're just really, really lovely people, and their history is fascinating. I love the culture, and that's basically my interest. I'm really into it, and I thought I've got to start writing about this now. Child of the Heathen. It's for an adult audience, particularly those who are interested in horror or supernatural thrillers. I wouldn't advise reading it to anybody younger than an adult. It's not so much gore, it's not like some of the films where you get lots of blood and guts, and it's not like that, but it's some of the other content of it, because it is quite, there's the word decadent, it's an evil thing, so it affects people different ways. There's quite a bit of sex in it, but only a little bit at a time. It's not all about sex. I don't think it's all about sex, because it's not. It's just that there are certain things that you wouldn't really want a youngster to read. Jonathan Sparkling Eyes is the son of a French trapper and a Cree Indian woman. His father calls him Child of the Heathen because he believes that he's not his son. He believes that his wife had this boy with another man, with an Indian, as opposed to a white man. And that's why it's called Child of the Heathen, because in those times there was a lot of racism toward the Indians, toward First Nations, toward all the Indians in Canada. I'm hoping it might shed a new light on the way people look at the native people. It actually shows how the Indians were sent to, when they were young, children were snatched away from their families and sent to residential schools, which were run by the churches. And then where they had their hair cut, they weren't allowed to speak their language, they weren't allowed to do their dances, they just weren't allowed to dress the way they used to do, and they weren't allowed to be involved with the families. They were just cut off completely, and they tried to make white men or white girls out of these Indians. And many of them didn't survive because they were either beaten, starved, or 101 other things were done to them. And those who returned didn't know whether they were Indian or white, and they were not accepted by their own people or the white people in some cases. And Deacon, who is my actual main character, Deacon Spirit of the Wind, he's adopted by a white woman so that he doesn't have to go to this residential school. It's just really explaining the way they were treated and the way they're still being treated, and I'm hoping, even though it's an entertaining book, they might sort of look at it from a different angle, from a native's point of view. I don't like prejudice, and I really don't like the way they feel about the Indians. I was really upset when I was in Canada when I found out how people felt. I mean, I knew they did, but not to that extent. Not in today, you know. Well, all right, 68 it was, but it's not nice. Because I wanted to. Because I've had this idea of writing about the Indians for a long, long time. And the other books I used to write were, well, forget about those books, that was when I was a kid. Because I've very interest in the Native American culture. I should say Native Canadian because it's Canada, not America. And I just got on with them so well, and there's so many stories you could write about that I decided it's time I wrote my own book. I met, while I was living in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, I met this Reverend Stanley Cuthand, who was a liaison officer for the Department of Indian Affairs. And I used to go and visit him, and he used to tell me these wonderful stories about his people, the Cree. And by then I was already writing about them. It's just something I've always wanted to do. I get a lot of pleasure out of it. Well, I suppose it's my first book I want to publish, but a lot of it is because of the people I met when I was over there, the Cree Indians I met, the ones I made friends with. And it also reminds me of, there was Anne Anderson. She taught me the Cree language. Now, her mother was Cree and her father was Scottish, but she looked really native. You wouldn't have known she was any white in her. And her husband, Joe, he was a lovely man. He didn't speak a word of English, spoke only Cree, but he had a sense of humour, was always smiling, always made me laugh. And she took me to the powwow, she took me all over the place. And when I read the book, I mean, I've tried to bring elements of that into the story. And when I write it and when I read it, I always think of them. Wonderful. I was on a high, really excited about it. I didn't think, to be honest, anybody would want to read it. So I was delighted when Rogue Phoenix Press said they'd take a chance on it. Good for them. It's coming out on the 1st of September, but we're doing a book launch at my birthday party, which is also on the 1st of September. And the publishing company said we should be able to have paperback copies by then. So we shall have them on show. And hopefully all these people at the theatre company who said they want to buy a copy will actually buy one. That remains to be seen whether they actually do. But we didn't, well, I was told that it would be 2 weeks after the ebook went out before we could have the paperback copies, but I did ask. And I've worked hard to get it all finished quickly enough so that they could do it. So all being well, they should be there. And then people can make up their own minds, can't they? I enjoyed writing it anyway, and I've written a second book, carrying on from it, I've started a third one. And because there's so many characters in it, you can go all different angles. I've got plenty to keep me going. As she stood there paralysed by what was taking place, a strong, sickly stench assailed her nostrils, making her feel nauseous. All at once, Janine was surrounded by a sense of dread that she was no longer alone. Something cold, almost metallic, crawled across her back and parked up at the base of her spine. Nothing tangible, nothing she could see or touch, but it lingered like a festering toothache. The night was turning colder, drawing the last vestige of warm intoxication from her stick-thin body. She heard the crackle of breaking twigs, as if walked on by a heavy boot or a huge paw, and a sudden gust of icy wind whipped her hair round her face. Somewhere out there was a placid lake, now obliterated by the expanding mist, but she could hear water loud, churning and angry, as if lashed by a ferocious storm. What if she was heading for it and couldn't see it? Spurred on by fear, Janine tried to run, but restricted by her body-clinging full-length gown and one high-heeled shoe, she stumbled and fell over an object on the ground.